Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps from AOPA.
Ask the A&Ps is the show where we try to answer your most difficult questions. So if you have a difficult one, even if you have an easy one, we give the easy ones to Paul.
That's right.
We give the hard ones to Colleen. At any rate, if you have a question of any kind, particularly if it's a tough one, send it to us at podcasts@aopa.org for a chance to get on the show.
And please follow and subscribe so you can be alerted anytime a new set of questionable answers is published.
And if you want to get on our email list for our monthly newsletter and other good stuff, easiest way to do that is to text the word savvy, SAVVY, to 33777, and a little bot will come up and ask you for your name and email address and add you to our email list. Again, text SAVVY savvy to 33777 to put yourself on our list.
So do you publish a podcast or drop a podcast? I mean, I'm trying to be young and cool.
Drop sounds better.
Drop. Yeah, that does sound better.
I like that.
Yeah.
Produce.
So, what's that?
Produce.
Yeah, but putting it out there, that's the thing.
That's different.
There must be a Tennessee word for that.
There's got to be. I'll find it.
And if there's not, there's an Arkansas word for that.
I've got them both covered. So I did a pre-buy or finished a pre-buy yesterday, one of those ones where I go to the airplane, which is what I do. And it's always interesting, the things that I find. You find airworthiness things, and then you find maybe not current airworthiness things, but things that will cost money, because the pre-buy is always about money and not so much about airworthiness. And this one kind of got my attention because the airplane was opened up and prepared for an annual. I show up and do the pre-buy, and as I'm leaving,
you're showing up the day before the annual is supposed to start.
The day before the annual starts. So the local A&P opens the airplane because the IA is from out of town. So the IA travels in. I'm pretty much literally walking out of the hangar as the IA walks in the hangar. And I've got my list of, 63 items, and about 28 of those were airworthiness related.
Wow.
But you're not sharing your list with the IA, right?
Well, no. Well, eventually it will be shared with the IA, but at the moment, the list is the property of the buyer.
Right.
Exactly.
So I don't give that to anybody. And if the buyer wants to share with the seller, and then the seller wants to share with the IA, that's fine. Mm-hmm. If there's something that's safety of flight related, I will definitely want to make sure that gets shared so that it doesn't get missed during the annual. But there were so many things that I found for the buyer that a mechanic, or the inspector during annual might completely ignore because it's not due, or it's not an airworthiness something today. And he actually had considered having the local mechanic do the pre-buy. And all that got figured out before he called me. Someone shook him, I don't know, grabbed him by the buttonholes and shook him real good and said, no, you don't hire the existing mechanic to do it. So a few things. This is a Cessna 210. It's a turbo 210. So it has an old style exhaust on it, which is still passing the 50-hour pressure test, which is fine. Mm-hmm. But when it fails, you don't get an old exhaust. You don't get an old style. You get a new style. It's like $15,000. It's this huge amount. And there's a few other things so I bore scoped inside the engine. This is a 520, so I can go down through the oil filler port. Mm-hmm. All of the lifters were rusted, and they had been rusted for a while. And the faces of the lifters were rusted, but the camshaft was good. So you know, that's going to be however many hours to replace the lifters and save it. But there's no requirement to look inside the engine with the bore scope.
Annual. Yeah.
Now, nowadays,
It's
fortunately,
virtually never done.
yeah, it's never done. And in part because we're out here making a big deal of it during the podcast or on Savvy or whatever. You know, a lot of people are bore scoping their cylinders, but they're still not looking down in the engine and that sort of thing. Those are like the two biggest. There's 4 or 5 other things like that, but it just, when people will say, "Oh, I got an annual done as the pre-buy," it's like that's looking for all the wrong things. I mean, some of the things are in there, but also, you know, if you're doing a pre-buy on a Mooney or a Bonanza, you know, I get calls every now and then, in part because of the podcast. They'll call and say, "Oh, can you do a pre-buy on my Bonanza?" I'm like, no, I am the wrong guy.
Yeah.
You want a subject matter expert on that model airplane. And if you're spending a couple of $100,000, you know, a few thousand to get a pre-buy by a SME is worth every penny, every single penny. Anyway,
did you get a look at the wing spark carry through?
Yes, and the AD was improperly complied with.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this is another thing. You talk about reading airworthiness directives. The AD, you get down to paragraph I think it is, for the wing spark carry through inspection. It says, after you've done the eddy current and everything, it says, refer to the service letter from Textron, which is service bulletin, for applying corrosion protection. And it says paragraphs 9 and 10. Paragraph 9 is to apply, basically you're going to apply an epoxy primer, and it states that the entire area must be covered. Well, okay, that's a little iffy. Maybe that's just the bottom surface of the carry through that should be done, because that's where the eddy current is done.
Yeah.
But in the paragraph 10, which it also specifically calls out in the AD, it says you're going to apply CIC to the entire exposed surface. So it's a little broader thing. And I see so many, probably half of the pre-buys I do and half of the new annuals that come into our shop, only the bottom surface of the spar is primed and coated with CIC. If it's a newer airplane that had primer on the spar from the factory, they only put the CIC on the bottom surface. And on this one, it has the overhead oxygen bottles. Well, nobody wants to take those out. And that's so
to get behind them, you mean?
You have, there's 2 bottles after the spar and 2 in front. Wow. And to put all this coating on there, you have to remove the bottles.
But you're halfway there when you have it all exposed. You know, it's so painful that they just don't do it right when they have it.
Well, like this one, I don't think they took the bottles out because they thought, we're only going to do this bottom surface. And so they saved all kinds of time. Well, now somebody gets to pay for it because it's 25 to 30 hours to remove the headliner, get the bottles down, do all this painting, and then put it all back together. Yeah.
Wow.
The headliner is probably the worst part.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. the risk of damaging it.
Can you unzip that headliner, or do you have to remove it?
You can unzip it to take a peek, but you can't. But you can't.
I don't even have a zipper in my headliner. In my Cardinal. Well, I have to brave
and
the plastic.
Problem is if it's an older airplane and that headliner's been in there for a while, it might be just like
it's like,
well, so this is how sneaky.
No non-destructive way to remove it.
Right. Here's how sneaky I am. When an airplane shows up that has a headliner like that, I let the owner unzip it.
Yeah.
And then I let the owner zip it back because I know it's going to tear. And I don't want to be blamed for it.
Yeah.
Oh,
but
anyway,
the key thing is that a bunch of the stuff you found during your pre-buy was stuff that had probably been there for years and had made it through a bunch of annual inspections without being
because it's
identified.
Airworthy.
And some of them
and a lot of it is stuff
is.
you don't look at on an annual because
right. like the lifters.
Owners really wouldn't appreciate it if you look at more on an annual than you have to.
Yeah,
because if you look hard enough at any airplane, you're going to find unairworthy stuff. But it's really a question of how hard you look.
Well, and it's a different set of eyes. So when I go look at a plane, I warn everybody I'm going to find stuff, not because I'm all nitpicky and everything, but I'm a different person that's been looking at it. So I have in this list of 63 items that I found, there were, 20 or 25 airworthiness issues, and then a bunch of other just stuff. And, so people are asking, well, do I have to do all that stuff? No, that's no big deal. It doesn't mean it's a bad mechanic in the past. It just means it's a different set of eyes. And that mechanic may work on 2 Cessna 210s, and I work on however many lots of 210s. Little things like on Cessnas, they had for a period of time in the 70s, they were installing 3-piece Macaulay wheels.
Those magnesium ones.
Yeah, the center hub was magnesium, and they're awful. They're terrible about cracking. Well, they're totally legitimate to stay on there. And if you're an owner, use them up. Just be careful. Be sure you check for cracks at every tire change and use a torque wrench on the screws, all that. But as a buyer, one of the first things you're probably going to want to do is offload those things and install a Cleveland set. Well, it's not something to write up during an annual, but it's definitely something you want to know during a pre-buy, because this is future money.
Yeah.
Our first question is from Ralph, who had to throw away what he thought was a perfectly good engine. Go ahead, Ralph, with your sad story.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
There's a small group of 7 of us down here in Punta Gorda, Florida, and we own a little 1968 Cherokee 180. And when the engine had about 3,000 hours on it, we decided it's due time to do an overhaul. So we went to a very reputable shop up in Sebring, Florida, and had them do a major overhaul, which included everything inside the case, including a new crank. So it was a pretty expensive ordeal.
A new crank. Oh,
wow.
That is
crank.
expensive.
We actually had a little corrosion. It's on the old crank. So it was time to replace it. So we were doing some other upgrades and stuff. So the airplane wasn't flying a whole lot, about 50 hours a year. First annual, everything looked great. Second annual, we were just a little over 100 hours. And the mechanic called me over and said, I think you got a stuck valve. And I said, okay, I've dealt with that before. Well, he pulled the valve cover off, and we saw some corrosion in there. And we said, uh-oh. So we start doing a little more investigating, and he puts a scope in there, and it's not looking nice. So we have him pull a cylinder, thinking we'll just have to replace that one cylinder. Well, when he pulls the cylinder where you can see everything inside the engine, the new camshaft, gears, everything was ruined.
Ooh.
Now, you've got some pictures. I've shown them to numerous A&Ps, and I can't get any explanation of what caused this, because there's a lot of airplanes on our field here that don't fly any more than ours. And I went back to the shop and, see if they'd replace this under warranty. And they said no, because, what did we do to cause the situation? So they worked with us, very good people up there. And we had to do a complete rebuild again with everything inside the case outside of the crankshaft. And which he basically did at cost, which really was a big help to us.
Yeah.
So now we've got about a $50,000 engine on a Cherokee 180.
Yeah,
that
right.
hurts.
And the new engine's got about 100 hours on it. We added a JPI 730 so we can see exactly what's going in there, temperature wise, everything. And so our next annual's in September. So we'll see, but so far things are looking good, but we're still trying to figure out what went wrong the first time. We were running Phillips 20W30, and which
W50.
Yeah, 20W50 when that's what we were using when I was flying corporate and, common oil. We've switched now to the new engine. We're running the Victory oil with the Phillips rust additive that they told us about up at Sun and Fun. So that's where we're at. So tell us what's wrong.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. One is I don't see, I guess there is some cross hatching on this cylinder.
Yeah,
it's hard to see. When I see rust on an engine, there's a couple of things. One is it doesn't fly much, but you already know that. The other thing is you don't know how long these parts were sitting on a shelf before they were installed. And when the engine is assembled, everything needs to be wet with some sort of lubricant, because as soon as it gets assembled, then there's more sitting time. And then it goes from the protected environment inside the engine shop to the very unprotected environment in your airplane. And as soon as you start the engine, now you've sucked all kinds of corrosive air into the engine, and you have all these parts that have already been kind of primed for corrosion just because they were dry. And I have a feeling that the rust started before the engine was installed on the airplane.
You're saying they would install rusty parts?
No, they weren't rusty, but they were dry.
I mean, but this is a shop in Florida. They should.
But they're inside an environmentally controlled building.
Not necessarily.
Well, but more than likely, the shop would be fairly dry on the inside. But nevertheless, I think that the environment for the rust started before it was on the airplane. And then after you start it, then all of that just accelerates. Otherwise, I just don't see an explanation for the rust being in the places where it is, because it's true. Other airplanes flying in the same environment don't have the same rust issue.
Yeah. I mean, I agree.
I agree with Paul. I don't really understand the timeline exactly on this engine, but it does appear that from the time that the engine was assembled to the time that it started flying was probably when this occurred.
Yep.
And we see this a ton with experimentals where a guy's building an RV, he orders the engine, it arrives, but he's not ready for it yet. And then by the time he's ready for it, the engine has got major corrosion issues. I don't know, in this case, what the timeline is from the time that they built it to the time that it started flying, but
it was about a month.
A month? That's not very long.
That's not long.
It is Florida.
That's not very long.
Where was it stored while it waited to be put on the airplane?
It was stored at his shop in Sebring. We went over and picked it up, and it looked like it was properly packaged compared to other engines that I've dealt with in the past. That come from the factory, from the day you picked it up until the day you ran the engine, how long was that? I would say around a month.
Okay.
By the time they get reinstalled and,
that's not very long.
That's not very long. Yeah. I don't know that I'm going to retract my opinion, but that shouldn't be this much. Of course, 50 hours a year on a brand new engine, that is not much time.
Yeah.
If you did it 1 hour per week, it'd be great.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's really not the number of hours you put on it. It's how those hours are distributed. It's not the use, it's the disuse.
The problem is in Florida, nobody wants to fly it in the summertime because of the heat. So
Yeah.
no air
Wow.
conditioning.
And I can say Florida it just has a hideous track record of corrosion issues.
Yeah, we did buy we're ordering an engine saver.
I was
going to say that there are a few things that can be done. One of them is an engine dehumidifier like the one that you were talking about. There are a number of those available. And the other thing I would strongly recommend is using CamGuard. You said that you would switch to Victory oil.
Correct.
But Victory oil, the only difference between Victory oil and XC is the addition of triphenyl phosphate, which is an anti-scuff additive, but it's not an anti-corrosion additive.
Well, they
CamGuard. Yeah, go ahead.
They sold us when we was up at Fun and Son the Phillips additive. He said it's their version of the CamGuard.
Mm.
Oh,
I'm not aware of a Phillips.
10-1.
that was Philip's sales pitch.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with a Phillips any corrosion. I mean, I'm familiar with the anti-rust oil, which is a pickling oil, but I'm not familiar with an additive specifically. But at any rate, CamGuard is the most effective anti-corrosion additive that I'm aware of. And if it were me, I would instead of using Victory, I would use XC with CamGuard.
I'm looking at the website and it says it's a multi-grade oil with anti-wear additives. That's all it says.
What is the Victory?
Phillips Victory. Yeah.
Right. No, Phillips Victory oil is precisely Phillips XC with basically the Lycoming LW 16702.
Yeah. It doesn't say anything about anti-corrosion. Is what I'm.
Yeah. It's yeah. But apparently.
I mean, that doesn't mean it promotes corrosion. It just means that it's not.
No. But he's saying that Phillips had some kind of an additive to add into that oil, and I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
But we do know that CamGuard is quite effective. So between a CamGuard and a dehumidifier and hangering the airplane, that's about all you can do, except fly it more.
You need to fly more. Yeah. What'd you say? 7 people in this airplane? Come on, guys. You need to go flying more.
Well, we got a couple new young guys, an air traffic controller, and
maybe you need to put air conditioning in so you can fly it in the summer.
We bought one of those ice things. So.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You sit on the back seat.
Yeah, works pretty good.
So I think it behooves you to make an addition to your bylaws for this group that requires the airplane be flown 1 hour per week by somebody.
I wouldn't disagree.
If it's really hot, then whoever draws the short straw has to fly the airplane.
Yeah. Just go up at 6 a.m. It'll be fine.
That's true.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say. That's a tough lesson to learn, Ralph.
Yeah.
But
it was
when we have a hideous track record of finding engine corrosion on pre-buys if they're Florida airplanes.
Yeah.
And we always try to convince our clients if they're looking at several different airplanes, don't look at the one in Florida because it's just, it's not that every airplane in Florida is a problem, but the likelihoods of having internal engine corrosion problems in Florida is very high.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just got to fly more. That's all we can say, because it sounds like you're doing everything else right,
Yeah.
Except for
the engine saver and CamGuard
will help.
And fly it more. That's probably.
So this is what I have a letter that I have offered to give to the non-flying spouses of many of my owners that are like, well, it's expensive to fly more and all that. And my letter states that you will spend less money by flying more frequently.
Yeah.
And this is the letter to give to your significant other that is also in charge of the finances, or as Helen is known, the OFO, the only financial officer. So if you need that letter, I'll be happy to send you a signed version to disperse amongst your members.
Of course, the wives will say, Paul who?
Paul who?
Instead of Paul new? But it's worth a try.
Worth a try.
Thank you.
All right, Ralph. Appreciate the call.
Thanks for the information, Ralph, and the pictures. Thank you. Our next question's from Ed, who is trying to stir the pot. I'm going to really enjoy this one, Ed. Go ahead.
Troublemakers.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do, I guess. By the way, thanks for taking my call. I'm a big Ask the A&P fan and regular listener. Also, our Club Bonanza is a savvy customer, so we like your service.
Great.
So,
good to hear.
So I forwarded you guys an article that was published a couple years ago in the American Bonanza Society magazine, talking about how for the big bore Continental engines, that rich of peak operations might be more beneficial, especially with the older, higher time engines. And I'm not a A&P or really a mechanic, and I'm not an engineer. So just trying to sift through a lot of the lore that's out there and make some sense of this.
Well, when I read it, and my reaction was bull hockey.
Bull hockey. What a surprise.
Or bull pucky. I don't know.
So our club, on our club checklist, we have our own checklist for the Bonanza, and for the cruise section, it says to operate 100 degrees rich of peak, which is basically what we do. And I noticed in the Bonanza handbook that on the checklist item, it just says lean to fuel flow via the performance charts. However, then the next section of the manual goes into more detail on leaning by EGT, and it has either set lean cruise EGT, or best power. So it doesn't really recommend doing either one. It gives you a choice after the checklist actually says use the performance charts and set the fuel flow. So how does the average
performance charts don't have lean of peak?
Right. And all of these POHs were written, back in the dark ages before we knew what we now know about how these engines operate.
But wouldn't it be helpful to just summarize a couple of the key points from the article? Like the writer in the article said he had valves burning and he attributed it to lean of peak operations, and claimed as soon as he switched to rich of peak, the one valve that was going bad healed itself.
Right.
He also says he thinks, and he says, this is my theory, when you're rich of peak, the unburned fuel acts as an effective conduit for transferring heat between the valve face and the seat, and also provides a sort of gasket for better sealing. What do you think about that, Mike?
I think he made it kind of clear.
I don't think much about that. I mean, he's sort of acting as if the unburned fuel is like some kind of a liquid or something. It's not.
Yeah. An excellent conductor of heat is what he said.
It's vapor.
It's not unburned.
It doesn't conduct anything. Well, it may be unburned, but it's not liquid.
He also had a really interesting comment that I have a comment on. He said, oxygen is very reactive at high temperatures. When operating lean of peak, there's a surplus of hot, uncombined oxygen sailing by the valve, just looking for something to combine with, and it causes erosion on the valves. Now that
But-
sounded like I don't want to use the word bull hockey, but it sounds like somebody's really extrapolating. Except I do have one data point. We know a very well-respected exhaust fabricator here in San Diego who builds exhausts for experimental aircraft and also does repairs on exhausts. And he said he can tell that an exhaust system has been operated lean of peak because it's, I think he used the word abraded or scoured or pitted. It has erosion. He actually said that. We didn't ask. He was offering that when we just asked him his opinion on lean of peak operations. So it kind of went in line with what this author was saying, that there's some kind of additional abrasion on exhaust systems because of the lean mixture.
But when you look at valves that are burning or not sealing, they're not eroded.
They've got
There's no
deposits all
abrasion.
over
They
them.
have
Typically.
deposits on them.
Yeah.
And as soon as you clean the deposits off, the metal is fine. So
I agree.
That makes no sense to me at all. Same thing. Now, sometimes the seats will have erosion because there's been aluminum oxide or whatever the white powdery stuff is that gets between the valve and the valve seat, and you'll have a leak in that one spot. And the thing that usually erodes is the seat, not the valve. We get the little spillways that we talk about when we borescope. We don't see the spillways on the valves. Its spillway is always on the seat.
Yeah, these are technical issues beyond my understanding mostly. So,
well, mine too.
But Colleen, reacting to what your exhaust friend said, you can certainly tell when you look at an exhaust whether the thing's been running rich of peak or lean of peak, because if it's been running rich of peak, there's a layer of deposits on the thing, and there's much less when you're running lean of peak.
There's a difference between clean and eroded. And he specifically said he felt that the exhaust looked abused in a way that was suggesting erosion. I don't remember the exact term, not just clean. I'm just relaying what he said.
Yeah. Interesting. Because I don't see much difference, or at least not something that's got my attention that suggests that exhaust systems don't last as long on lean of peak engines versus rich of peak.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've never seen any evidence of that. Now, erosion of exhaust components is interesting because it definitely happens. And what I've noticed is that erosion is always maximum where the exhaust makes a bend.
The outside,
and it's
of the
always
bend.
on the outside of the bend.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes sense because you've got this very, very hot gas that normally when it flows through the exhaust system, there's kind of a boundary layer that protects the exhaust plumbing from the heat. But when the exhaust plumbing is trying to coerce this gas to make a turn, which it really doesn't want to do, the boundary layer is going to be thin or non-existent at the outside of the bend, and I think that's why, when the exhaust starts to pinhole and stuff like that, it's or bulge, it's usually at the outside of the bend.
Okay.
And in addition to that, when you actually mechanically make those bends, the outside of the bend, the metal is stretched.
Yeah,
that's right. It's thinner.
Inside of the bend, it's compressed, so it's actually thinner on the. So it starts off at a disadvantage. And on turbo airplanes, especially like the Malibu and the Cirrus and the Columbias, all have these exhaust transitions, and it's actually where the turbo is mounted. Well, most airplanes have exhaust transitions, but the way that these are made, there's one particular area that gets really hot. I don't know. I think it's a flow thing, and it actually begins to bulge. So running those TITs at something below 1650 or 1600 really helps longevity, but I don't know that it makes any difference Lena Peak or Richa Peak, because almost all the Malibu people are Richa Peak people, and the Columbia and Cirrus people are Lena Peak people, but they have the same basic part.
I didn't realize Malibu people were Richa Peak people. That's interesting. I wonder why that is.
I don't know, but every time I talk to one, especially the Lycoming powered folks.
Yeah, it's probably because they follow the POH like silly people,
and but every time I talk to one, they're just they're anti-vaxxers kind of attitude. So, oh no, don't do that.
So our Bonanza is normally aspirated, and I think the author of the article said that by going Lena Peak and just reducing power a little bit, you get the benefits of a Lena Peak operation, but you still are being kinder to your valves than you would under a Lena Peak scenario.
Oh, going lower power Richa Peak versus Lena Peak.
Right. He said it's a little bit higher fuel flow, and you go a little bit slower.
Yeah, I really think he has it backwards. Everything we know indicates that Lena Peak operation is much kinder to the engine because the temperatures and pressures are reduced. The power pulse and the pressure pulse in the cylinder is a lower amplitude and broader pulse rather than a sharply peaked pulse like it is Richa Peak.
And do you think that goes for normally aspirated, turbocharged, big bore, small bore? Is it pretty much across the board?
I don't see why. Yeah,
it is. I mean, the big difference is that with a normally aspirated engine, running Lena Peak results in a reduction of horsepower and a somewhat slower airspeed. Whereas in a turbocharged airplane, it doesn't, because you basically the engine always thinks it's at sea level.
Right.
Ed, you said that your IO 550 recently had cracks in 5 cylinders, and you guys were wondering if that was due to your Lena Peak operations.
That's right. It's pretty much a matter of conjecture what actually caused it.
What kind of cracks are we talking about?
Where were the cracks?
There were small cracks, as I understand it, between the spark plug hole and
the injector.
It's not a crack.
Right.
Oh,
yeah,
gosh,
those
hurts.
are almost never cracks. And mechanics are just famous for euthanizing cylinders because they think they have a crack. But first of all, even if it was a crack, and that is an area where cracks can form. But the crack, if the crack isn't actually blue stained and leaking fuel, it's really a non-event, because the crack isn't going anywhere, and it's in a low stress area,
and it's already stop drilled at both ends.
It's stop drilled at both ends. But I mean, technically, if it's leaking fuel, then you probably need to. But so many of those things that are attributed to being cracks, if you sand them and dye pen them, they magically disappear because they're just really casting artifacts rather than real bona fide cracks.
Sometimes,
I may have misspoke. It was between the spark plug hole and one of the valves. That's I didn't see it, and as I said, I'm not a mechanic, so.
If it was a crack from one of the valve seats, then it would have had to been detected from the inside.
In the
borescope.
You wouldn't see that from the outside.
Yeah,
I see.
If it's on the outside,
and if there is a crack going to a valve seat that you see it with a borescope, then it probably is worth pulling the jug, because the concern is that the seat might come out.
Yeah.
But what we found on the external, which is real common on the 550, where it looks like a crack from the spark plug to the injector
Yeah.
boss,
hmm
we find it's usually the lubricant that you put on the threads of the spark plug. When it gets really hot, there's an airflow, and this little stream of it makes its way from the spark plug to the injector boss. It's hilarious.
You could just
You don't-
clean it. Really?
Oh yeah, you don't even have to
Oh.
sand it. We
Yeah.
get out a cloth rag with a little avgas, because avgas is a great solvent, and you just scrub on a little bit, and it magically goes away.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't think that was the case with our aircraft. I think it was an actual crack, and it was
It's
they
just really
diagnosed it with a dye penetrant.
well. So that means it has to be external, and the chances of 5 cylinders cracking at the same time in the same place are pretty slim. Now there has
Yeah.
been an AD on certain cylinders from Continental where they crack, and it's a little flange area, a little flashing that has to be dressed down. And we've had cylinders literally come apart because of that. And it's a very serious issue. And I'm not 100%.
But that's a different place on the cylinder.
It's a
right?
different place,
Yeah.
right? And I don't know, gosh, there's almost none that have been found cracked before they fully separate. Almost all of them are discovered, after the cylinders come apart. But 5 cylinders at one time with a crack, that's just really suspicious to me.
Sorry.
But it's
doesn't
done
help
now.
Ed now. Yeah.
No, it doesn't help me. Ed,
it's-
I'm sure they were all
it's-
cracked. You absolutely,
not-
it's a great thing that you pulled those.
Well, it's
and
repaired now, and it's running well. So
You remember we've run into some cases where some overzealous shops that they got an eddy current machine, and they started
Gosh, yeah.
using eddy current to test cylinders and found
can't do
every
it.
single one of them cracked. You can't use eddy current to do that.
No. And if you do that, they're cracked everywhere. All the
Right.
fins are cracked all over the place. Eddy current. You have to use a dye pin. That's the only way to do it.
Yeah. Well,
well, I'm not sure we did anything but add more ingredients to the pot and stirred it a little bit, but it's been an interesting discussion.
Well, pretend like we didn't say any of that stuff about maybe your cylinders weren't cracked. We'll just mentally edit that out of the script.
but we still do advocate lean of peak operations. And I just like to say it was probably a teaser to start talking about this article without actually citing the article. If anybody wants to read it, it's an article in the American Bonanza Society by Gary Kyleman, Rethinking Lean of Peak, Running Rich of Peak for Longer Exhaust Valve Life. And it was dated the 8th of October, 2024, if anybody wants to look it up.
And it says, I'm reading at the bottom, it says, first appeared in the January 2023 issue, page 60.
Thank you. Yeah. So interesting reading. I mean,
Yeah.
Now, if somebody wants to increase exhaust valve life in Continental engines, one of the best things you can do is periodically replace the rotocoils.
Yep.
Because that's a known weak spot on these engines. And Continental, they came out with a new improved version of the rotocoil, which seems to fail a lot more quickly than the previous version. And then there have been rumors that they were going to come out with another version of the rotocoil that solved all the problems, and they never have done that. So I don't know. It's a known weak spot.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But if the valve stops rotating, then it's gonna start getting heat distressed.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I hope this was helpful, Ed. Probably.
Well, it was certainly fun, and I'm sure it'll generate some discussion at the club.
Yeah. That's what we're all about, generating discussion.
Yeah. We don't have to have a right
Causing-
answer. We just want to get you talking.
We want to cause churn out there. So
Churn.
I just
away.
wanted to say horse hockey. That's
He's been waiting for days.
yeah. Anyway, thanks for being so brave to dial us up.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, and I'll be continuing to listen. I really enjoy your show.
Good.
Great. We
Great.
appreciate it.
Take care.
See you, Ed.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So our next question is from Thad, who I think we need to add to our membership list in the Overthinkers Anonymous. Always welcome another fresh member, Thad. What's going on?
Thank you. I appreciate having me on, and I feel like I'm in the presence of royalty. So I have a
Royal Pains.
I have a 1977 182 Model Q, and unfortunately, I had to have the engine. Oh, a fantastic plane! And I had to have the engine rebuilt in 2021 due to corrosion. And it was done by a reputable shop in North Carolina. I did the break-in meticulously. And since then, it's been a rock star. I fly it usually at about 60 to 65% power, and it burns very little oil. In fact, I think too little. It only goes through about a quart every 50 hours.
Wow.
And so I've been sending the oil out to analysis to Blackstone, who I love, and they give a great detailed report. But it makes more chromium and aluminum than they're happy with. It does have the superior Millennium cylinders in it. And one of the thoughts that I had is, if I'm adding that little fresh oil in that amount of time, is it concentrating the contaminants or the products?
Concentrating. That's an interesting term to use.
I don't think so, but it is possible that you're not getting enough lubrication on the cylinders. There's only two places that chromium can come from. One is from the rings, and the other is from the valve stems, exhaust valve stems, which are chrome plated. Normally, if we have a problem with valve stem wear, we'll see high chromium and high nickel together, because the valve guides are high nickel alloy. And we're not seeing that in your report. The nickel is perfectly normal. Chromium and aluminum, the aluminum could conceivably be from pistons, I guess, is the only place it could really come from. And the chromium from the rings. Yeah, if it was but if it was piston pin plug scuffing, then we wouldn't have the chromium. High chromium is the most noticeable thing here. The aluminum is a little bit high, but the chromium is sky high.
So my compressions are good, and we have bore scoped it. I have an older A&P who is comfortable with bore scopes, but I don't think an expert by any means. And I do owner assisted annuals and have done them with it. That all looks good.
The cross hatching looks good on the cylinder walls.
The cross hatching looks good, and I don't see any, the glazing. In other words, we didn't see anything that looks like that's less than it should be. Of course, my experience is very limited, and like I said, I think I certainly wouldn't put him up as an expert. So my question really also too was, in other words, if I had a quart every 5 hours, like so many people do, I'll have added an entire 10 quarts in 50 hours. And
no reason to change it.
Right. Well, no, I mean, right. But wouldn't that, in theory, continue every time you add that, you're adding fresh oil that has nothing in it? So
it dilutes.
Sort of my question.
Yeah.
But maybe that's a false.
That's kind of faulty thinking, because whatever metal is being accumulated in the oil isn't going anywhere. It's still going to be there.
Well, it's leaking into the cylinders and getting burned. Maybe.
Could be losing some of it.
It's leaking somewhere. That's why he's replacing it. So those metals are leaking along with the oil.
Probably. Well, I don't know.
Now I changed over to Aeroshell a year ago, and interestingly enough, I did that on. I also have a airplane that has an IO 360, a Lycoming, and both of them get more leakage out of the breather tube. My thought was just because it's stickier and more of it's staying in the top of the engine.
Which
Huh.
aeroshell?
The 100
plus.
Okay.
plus, although
Straight
straight weight. Although this winter I did buy the new 80 plus just for the winter change.
Hmm.
I don't live in a cold climate, so all right. And the engine now has a little over 400 hours. So you would think that if this was gonna go down, it would have gone down by now if it was just normal ring wearing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The good part about this is that high chromium number is pretty stable.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't. I mean, I'm always more comfortable with oil reports when things are stable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is extraordinarily high chromium. I mean, it's many times higher than normal. The aluminum is a little bit on the high side, and everything else looked pretty normal. The iron was pretty much where we expect it to be. Maybe just slightly high, but
so what would you do if this were your engine, Mike?
I would keep flying it and checking the oil filter.
Yeah.
Okay. Keep an eye on the filter. Yeah.
I mean, in my view is that nothing in an oil report warrants doing anything invasive to the engine. It just would prompt you to increase your level of surveillance, bore scope it more often, check the oil filter more often, or more carefully.
Mm-hmm.
But 20 micron particles of wear metal are not going to cause anything terrible to happen with the engine. It's just one of these, something ain't quite normal here. And you just start looking harder to see if you can get a clue as to what it is.
Fair enough.
But like I said, there's really only two places that chrome can come from, and one is the piston rings, and the other are valve stems.
Very good. I did watch your video on the standardization of bore scope pictures, and maybe I'll start taking serial pictures and turning them into your databases.
One thing that would be interesting, just to help rule out the valve stem thing, is next time you do the bore scope inspection, take some good pictures with the valves wide open, mainly the exhaust valve, and see if you can get a good image of what the portion of the stems that you can see.
Which is, by the way, the hardest thing to do, but it's doable.
Yeah. Well, the hard part is to not get the bore scope tip stuck in the valve.
Yeah.
Well, just don't turn the engine while the bore scope is in it.
Right.
That's the key point. Don't ask me how I know.
The good part is that those bore scopes are getting so cheap now that you can consider them disposable. If you screw them up, just get another one.
We run through bore scopes. There isn't another tool in the shop that we replace more often than our bore scopes.
Really?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
Did you damage them? Really?
Well, they damage or they quit working for one reason or another. And we probably buy a bore scope every 2 or 3 months.
Oh, wow.
Odd. Wow. You guys
we keep 3 or 4 bore scopes.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you should probably attempt to get a year out of them.
Yeah, that may be about what we get, something like that. But I mean, we use a bore scope, and I take one every time I go do a pre-buy. So they get a lot of wear and tear. We use bore scopes for all sorts of things, not just checking the fillings in our teeth.
We don't want to know all the things you use your bore scope for. Jeez. Check the sewer pipes.
Whatever it takes.
You use the bore scope for all sorts of things, and they're not all aviation related.
No,
that's
not
all you have to say.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate everything you guys do for general aviation.
Well,
Thank you,
we
Ted.
appreciate the call.
I hope we helped you. I'm not sure
Yeah.
we
You did.
answered your
Thank
question,
you.
but
Absolutely. No, you did. And I
Well,
appreciate it.
enjoy that oil consumption because I'm jealous.
yeah, it's spectacular. Yes.
Thank you.
See you, Thad.
Bye.
All right, so we've got a lot of letters, which I'm excited about. A lot of really good points and kind of attaboys and stuff like that. The first is from Terry.
Oh, read
Terry
the
says-
attaboys.
Yeah,
we-
that's right. Yeah, we like those, right? Terry says he's thoroughly enjoyed listening to the podcast, and he's got all these things that come to mind. And so he's written actually about 3. I'm going to give you just the first one. This is about the Champion fine wire plugged cracked insulators, which I think we've talked about a few times.
Yeah.
He said he adamantly chose Tempest plugs over Champion for that very reason. He's seen a few Tempest plug cracks, but a lot of Champion plugs.
Yeah.
Our application is primarily on a Chieftain with Lycoming TIO 540s. And in fact, he's
lot of
encountered a
plugs.
CHT runaway due to pre-ignition caused by a broken nose core insulator while flying over the Caribbean with a fully loaded airplane. Yikes.
Absolutely. Yep.
After landing, investigation revealed the piston dome that looked sandblasted perfectly clean. Detonation induced by pre-ignition. A new spark plug solved that near disaster.
Absolutely.
So-
Wow.
He agrees.
Yeah, I've got several boxes of old Champion. Not old, well, they're old now. When did we start really seeing this? It was about 8 years ago.
I was
We
gonna say
started
10, but
noticing,
yeah.
maybe 10.
Yeah.
And so I've got 3 boxes of brand new Champion fine wire
Fine
plugs
wires. Wow.
that I won't give away. I won't sell them.
Yeah.
But I can't bring myself to throw them away. I don't know why. It's just there.
You could put them on eBay.
No, I don't want
No.
someone else to have them.
You don't want them out in the world.
I don't want them out there, and it's an awful lot of money. It hurts me to have it sitting there, but
Yeah.
just can't do it.
So I think, we've talked about A&Ps a lot and getting your A&P and starting out and that sort of thing. And so David writes about that. He says, with respect to your discussion regarding starting a business fresh out of A&P school, I couldn't agree more with getting some experience under your belt with both running a business and aircraft maintenance. 40 plus years ago, I was renting aircraft from an FBO that needed a mechanic and I was fresh out of school. I started and worked there for many years as the only mechanic for that FBO. Although I had a mechanical background and jet tech experience from the military, the one thing I always regretted was not having the opportunity to work for an established shop and to be exposed to the knowledge and experience of my elders. There was obviously no YouTube or online user groups to draw knowledge from in the early 80s, and so things like the Light Plane Maintenance publication and several books came out on engine maintenance over the years, and they're welcome additions to the library, but nothing replaces that experience that you get starting out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's true.
One of my things, because I always worked with Dad for a long, long time. Well, I did
Yeah.
the avionics shop thing.
Having a mentor is really
Yeah.
super important.
But what I didn't have is experience seeing how business was run by other people. And this was when Mike came to me in, I don't know, 2007 or whenever we were starting Savvy. He said, "What do you think of this
2008.
idea?" 2008, yeah. And I said, "I think that's awesome." And he said, "Well, do you want to come along and try it?" So I was the first account manager. And one of the very first things I noticed, I'm hearing all this noise in the background. The editors are going to love that. One of the first things I discovered was how other shops operate. And so now I'm functioning essentially as like on the customer side, not on the maintenance side. And I'm watching how other people are doing business thinking, well, that's a terrible way to do business. You should do this or that or the other. And then I realized, gee, I've done some of that. So
Yeah.
I started changing the way that I did some of our maintenance things. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things for mechanics to figure out is the business side.
Mhm.
The mentors are great for the mechanical side. You can find those, but most of the mentors that do the mechanical side also don't do well at the business side.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of those shops end up losing money because
yeah.
they can't predict, and they can't charge the customer correctly, and they take it in the shorts, and then they end up closing because they
Yeah.
can't make it work.
And they let people leave without paying. It's like,
Yeah.
no, you got to get paid.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's good. JR writes about the intermittent flap operation. You remember that question where
Yeah.
Mike gave Paul a hard time for going in detail through the system.
Because I waxed poetic.
Yeah. So he says, with regard to the last episode where someone was reporting that intermittent flap operation when in the full up position, I appreciated the overthinking of the micro switches.
Yay!
But one thing I didn't hear mentioned was the flap position pointer's bell crank. I've had a similar issue come through my shop once. I tried everything the team mentioned. I chased wires, replaced connectors, tested switches, and I couldn't figure out the problem. Until annual time came and I took the center column trim off. This was in early 2000s 206, and I found that the trim on the right side had lost its rigidity. Anyways, I didn't think of it at the time, but come assembly and post-maintenance test flight, I was sitting in the right seat, and I found that if I rested my foot against the trim on the right side, that there was enough flex that it actually stopped the position cable from moving. And that's what was holding the flaps up. I asked Homer about the times they had it, and then there had always been a passenger in the right seat. So he ended up putting essentially a stiffener in there so it couldn't happen.
That's amazing. Well, there's a spring, but apparently it was enough to that. I would never have thought about that. That's interesting. Who knew? Our next question is from Bruce, who's sick of sniffing gas fumes. You know, I'm pretty sure there's laws against that. Don't be doing that.
No, I'm hopefully over the effects of it by now, but it's been an experience, but by all means.
Right.
Well, what's up?
Well, we have a 1997 Cessna 172R, and I had to remove the fuel sender units because they would stop working, and clean them and put them back in many times. And we finally gave up the ghost and got rid of them and went with the SICE fuel sending model and a new aerospace logic fuel gauge. And that all went fine. I had a little mishap with the fuel senders because they were installed with arms in the wrong positions. But once I got that figured out, it came time to calibrate. And cutting to the chase here, I followed the procedures to drain the tanks. Our airplane has 5 drains on each wing. And I pumped it, each tank I did one at a time. Pump it out, then removed the rearmost inboard fuel drain completely. I got another gallon out of it that way. And then I would finally put some human weight on the tail to tip it back, and I could get a little bit more out of it, maybe a pint or so. And then I would check all of the other drains with a GATS jar and was getting nothing out. So feeling pretty good and looking forward to 13 trips up and down the ladder with 2 gallons at a time. I was working on calibrating this whole thing, but I'm coming up a little bit short. In the left-hand tank, it's supposed to get 28 gallons with 1.5 as unusable, and I'm getting 27.5 before it's really full to the filler neck. And on the right one, I'm getting about a full gallon less. So my question is, where's the other fuel? Because it's allegedly completely drained, because at the start of the calibration process, you have to put in 1.5 gallons of quote unquote unusable fuel before you calibrate the rest of the 2 gallon increments. Any ideas?
So many questions. The first one.
I want to hear Paul's idea. I've got an
he's
idea,
going.
but I want to hear Paul's first.
I have 2. So my first one is, where did you get this bucket? Because the buckets that you buy at Lowe's and Home Depot and all that are notoriously inaccurate.
Agreed.
If you want accuracy, because we used to try to do the same thing, and we could not get repeatability on calibrating these. So we call the fuel truck over, and we use the fuel truck because by law, those gauges, those flow gauges have to be checked. I think it's like once a year.
Right.
And back in the day when Dad had his gas stations, we had a 1, a 2, and a 5 gallon calibration tank, which you can get one of those. They're horribly expensive. So I have suspect of your bucket not being accurate. And the other thing, these are sealed, or they're wet wings. And when they're put together, all the parts are assembled with sealant. And so there's sealant in between the parts. It squishes out. And then after they get it all done, they go along and they apply a little, like a Hershey's Kiss, on top of each rivet to seal that rivet. And then all the exposed seams get sealed. It's all done. And the tank is actually a separate assembly from the rest of the wing, initially anyway. So I go visit the plant at Independence, Kansas. This has been, I don't know, 10 years ago, something like that. And I wanted to see how they did this. So the factory builds a tank, and then they seal it off, add 1/2 PSI pressure, and that's in the service manual. They submerge this tank in a big water tank, and they look for bubbles. And almost all of them have bubbles. So then they take it out of the tank, they take the covers off, and there's a guy in there that has these 2 brass spoons, and what a just artistry. And he applies a little tank sealant to this brass spoon and reaches in blindly and applies it where the bubbles come out. And he gets it almost every time. And anyway, so that's what they go through. The point of that was there's also ribs inside there. And these ribs and stringers that are bonded in place act as dams. And if you get extra sealant that extrudes out and blocks some of the passageways, so there's little channels in there, little weep holes, if you will, that allows the fuel to pass by the ribs and the stringers. If those get restricted in any way, then you get avgas trapped that can't get out. And in your case, you have all the extra drains, so you drained all the avgas. But it can also happen at the top of the tank, and this is what's really fascinating. So when you're draining the tank, if you have these dams that occur, but there was an AD on Mooney's for the same problem because the weep holes would get covered up. Yeah. So they would trap fuel when you drain, but when you fill it, you trap air on the top of the tank. And you can have the exact same loss of filling ability due to trapped air in the top of the tank.
Okay. That makes sense. Makes sense.
So you get out your borescope, since we like to talk about borescopes, and Colleen gives me, a rough time about all the various ways that we try to come up with how to use borescopes. And this is one of them. You run that borescope, you're going to have an extra light source though. So you drop another light source, put a string on it so you don't lose it, Yeah. And then and run your borescope down in there and have a look at the top of all the ribs and make sure there's good passageways for the fuel on the bottom and the air on the top to pass through. That'd be where I would start. Well, I would start with getting a calibrated bucket or use the fuel truck instead.
Okay. Well, anticipating your questioning about the bucket, I brought them. I had one from Home Depot, one from Lowe's, and I brought them home with a 2-cup measuring cup.
Oh gosh.
Oh yeah, I wanted to.
Wow.
I've tried everything. Trust me, it's actually pretty reasonably accurate with that.
Well, so
the other comment is that I did use my borescope and down inside the tank, and that's when I discovered that the floats weren't even going all the way down or up; they were bumping into a.
Yeah.
I had to rotate them 180 degrees.
Yep.
So I was way off before, but
So he's a borescope guy.
Yeah, we love it. So now run the borescope back in there and look for these blockages.
Now I had a totally different idea, which is like infinitely less exotic than Paul's ideas. Although I am shocked, Paul, that you, if I read you correctly, you're suggesting that Cessna might have actually delivered a tank that doesn't hold.
Yeah, that's what it
says it's hold. That's.
I find it hard to believe.
That's something the FAA should be told about.
Certified airplane.
My question is I was thinking a totally different direction, just for the hell of it. And Paul could tell me that I'm all wet here with fuel. And my question was, what position was the fuel selector in when you were doing all this? You know where I'm coming from, Paul?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good thought. Hopefully you had it in the right or left position.
Correct. There is no off position.
You did.
It was, yes, it was always in the left or always in the right. It didn't
But that's a
Well,
really good
it was
question.
it was a worthy thought anyway.
It was absolutely a worthy thought.
Yep.
Does the temperature of the fuel affect the volume very much?
Yeah,
It does some.
Yes, it does. So I even went down that avenue and found some data from Measurement Canada, actually. And I won't bore you with all the details, but for our tanks, if it's at 85 degrees, 86 degrees, you're going to get about a half a gallon less in a 28-gallon tank.
Yeah, the 28 gallons is based on a standard day or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, it is 59 degrees, 15 degrees centigrade. I mean, that's what they peg at the density at one point.
And that's what the fuel has to be at as well, not
Right.
just
Yeah.
the airplane. And the
Right.
fuel came out of maybe an underground tank or something else.
So that doesn't explain your 2.5 gallon discrepancy.
Right.
Well, really, it's only a half a gallon in one tank and 1 gallon in the other tank.
Well, I can tell you a half a gallon is pretty doggone close.
Okay, and that's what I was.
I would dismiss a half a gallon error. A 1 gallon error how many times did you try this?
Well, 3 times total.
And
Wow.
you got the same results every time?
The first 2 times we were at the float in the wrong position, but
Well, that doesn't have anything to do with the total amount of fuel you put in, though.
right. Every time I still got the same total amount of fuel.
Okay, so you had the exact same error in the total fuel that you added.
Correct.
And to Mike's point, did you try doing the left tank, then the right, and then the right tank, and then the left? Did you mix that up at all?
No, I always started with the left tank just because that was closest to the door and the fuel gauge.
Well, that's as good a reason as any. So this is a 97. This is only like the second year of production. That's pretty old.
The second year of production, those guys in Independence didn't know what the hell they were doing.
Oh yeah,
this is all about 5 years in, right?
The first ones came out in 96.
Uh-huh.
And so all the people at Independence,
they were newbies. They were all hired from Tulsa.
Yeah,
they didn't take any of the people from Wichita. They brought them all in from Tulsa, and they didn't know anything.
And they had to go find some people that had worked at Cessna prior to figure out how to set up the jigs and things for building the fuselages and stuff like that. It's really interesting to talk to them. But
I don't know. I think you have a lawsuit against Textron here.
Oh gosh!
Wait a minute, I didn't mean to start.
They shorted you a gallon. I think that's actionable.
Keep in mind, these are handmade, all that kind of stuff. The half gallon doesn't bother me. The 1 gallon bothers me a little bit, but not much. I'm still not real concerned about it. But I would definitely go in there with the borescope and make sure that all the passages are open. I think that's and it's an easy thing to do. And if you find that some are blocked and you're trapping air in the top, it's also pretty easy to fix because you can take the access panels off, go in there and clean out those holes with the drill bit or something and all that. So that's not too bad.
Okay.
But I think the next time you do it, I would do it in reverse order because Mike brought up the tank selector. If it is leaking, and they do leak, by the way, when they get old.
Yes, they do.
And unless you've confirmed that it doesn't leak, then that's a possibility. Something just struck me. When you do this test, do you do one tank and complete it and then go to the other?
Yes, I always do.
Oh,
and then
the airplane is leaning.
No, it's all leveled off.
No. When you fill up one tank, the airplane is leaning.
Yes.
When we do, often we'll do a 210 is typically here. And we go back and forth. So we'll do whatever it is, 2 gallons or 5 gallons on one side, and then we go to the other side. We keep the airplane literally balanced. If you're going to do all of one side, you're going to need to put something under the wings to support them because the airplane is not balanced. And that may have something to do with the difference in quantity.
Okay. I agree, and that was one of the recommendations, that you get a long 2x4 or something and put at the wing end tips. But this airplane
go get a
has
couple.
struts.
Just go get a couple of 6-foot ladders and some foam, and put that underneath the wings. It'll work great.
Okay.
Because we're not talking about a lot of weight here.
No, and it's certainly nothing that you could see visibly to the eye. That
Right.
the airplane's really leaning one way.
Oh, you could see it.
Oh, okay.
Really?
Yeah,
Really?
Yeah.
Paul,
By fumes.
Do these wet wing 172s have bilateral vents, or do they have the vent interconnect thing?
They do have interconnect vents, but they're supposedly in the top of the tank. So that shouldn't, it shouldn't.
But if one tank is full and the other tank is empty, can't the full tank be dribbling fuel into the empty tank through the vent interconnect, even if the fuel selector is?
I think you would have to start that event like a siphon. You just put the hose in the tank and it doesn't automatically happen. You would have to suck it in somehow to get it started. And in flight, yes, that's definitely an issue. But I think in the hangar, I wouldn't suspect that so much.
Okay. Well, and I appreciate your explanation of the insides of the tanks, because when I did the boroscope the first time, I was rather taken aback at all the sealant that was spread all over the place. And,
Yeah.
So
It's everywhere.
okay.
And so while you're in there, the sealant, the way you test the sealant for condition, because you're going to be messing with it, it should be about like a pencil eraser. You should be able to press your fingernail into it, and then it rebounds.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Well, I'm not sure when I'm going to schedule to try to do another recalibration. I was hoping you say you're pretty close, and that's kind of how I'm feeling with it right now.
We'll say that you're pretty close.
You're pretty close.
You shouldn't be cutting it that close when you're flying. Let's put it that way.
That's true. If this makes a difference, you're in the wrong spot.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. This is not the time to be using.
But when you spend
system.
all this money on these highfalutin fuel senders, then you want to get your money's worth out of it. Right?
You will love them, by the way. They're terrific.
They are.
Yeah.
Yes, it's been really, really nice to have them. They're very accurate, but we also have the JPI 730 with the fuel flow, and that's what I rely on.
Yeah.
So what are you displaying your fuel level on?
It's an aerospace logic.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are good.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Write down all the numbers you get during your calibration.
Oh, yes.
Because when it scrambles, you don't want to have to go through this whole process again.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. Well, I appreciate the feedback. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you'll get it worked out, Bruce.
Okay. Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We're wrapping up another Ask the A&Ps episode before you ask us a question that we absolutely can't touch. Hopefully, we helped out a few of our listeners and entertained the rest of you. We know you can count on us to keep sending us your tricky questions. Email us to be on the show at podcasts@aopa.org.
See you later.
Bye-bye, everybody.